Hi, everyone. We are talking navigating relationships for early stage founders. And I read this article a few days ago on growth hackers that determined that the greatest indicator of startup success is resilience. They say you might feel that things are moving slowly in your company, and that's totally natural. You actually may make decisions that, in retrospect, may actually lead to some undesired consequences or perceived setbacks in the goals that you're trying to reach. If you are an entrepreneur that is building a brand new startup, you probably have trouble seeing any light at the end of the tunnel from time to time. So it's how far startup success is defined by how far an entrepreneur is actually willing to go and wait to see its startup succeed. Hi everyone, my name is Hessie Jones and welcome to Tech Uncensored. One often overlooked reality about startups is that launching and sustaining a startup is not as straightforward as any successful entrepreneur might lead you to believe. Even with all the current resources that are available through accelerators like Altitude or through investor funding, there are persistent challenges that always remain. And as a budding startup entrepreneur, you have to be prepared to navigate a lot of those obstacles and endure a lot of those difficulties. Many startups face challenges in their journey to actually scale, and your ability to actually manage a lot of these issues as they surface is a sign of your character as you actually grow and develop as an entrepreneur and as a CEO. A lot of these challenges are mainly dependent on the relationships you cultivate and you create along the way. And what stories I find that never get told are the failures that transpire because of these relationships. They could be from opportunistic clients who are unwilling to pay for their services rendered. Or you may find that once you're developing your team, there will be that one toxic co founder or employee that you end up hiring. They could be partners or people in your network who are willing to drive enormous value through their own networks to help you succeed, but they ultimately default on their promise. So for many founders, these failures are hard lessons they take to a new set of relationships that they encounter, whether or not they develop a new team, whether or not they find the right partners or vendors, and even when they select a VC. But even you personally, as a CEO, it's determining your limitations and making the right decisions that you think are right for the company in that moment. So today I'm excited to welcome a few people who are going to talk about this topic with me. Devin Ramphel, who is the sector manager for innovation and technology at the City of Brampton's Economic Development Office, and formerly CEO and co-founder of Clean Air, which was acquired last year, 2023. I'm also pleased to welcome Jennifer Cameron, who is the co-founder and CEO of Inverse, and formerly the founder of Hyperwallet, which was acquired by PayPal in 2018 for 400 million. Both have some really important stories as founders who have navigated relationships in their startup journeys. And they're going to provide some amazing insights from their own experience to help founders build resilience. So welcome, Devin and Jennifer.
Thank you, Hessie.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. When for both of you, and I'll start with Devin. Um, tell me about your early startup experience. You developed this amazing idea. You wanted to see it grow. What made you become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, good question, Hessie. Thank you. I think in the beginning, the first real entrepreneurial journey I had was after university, right? So it was actually a totally different company. It wasn't cleanair.ai. It was a company called Dram Innovations, where we invented a fuel nozzle that doesn't drip when you pump gas at the gas station. So you pump gas right now, you take your nozzle out, it drips all over the floor. That was the first venture. That was featured on CBC's Dragon's Den. That was a special energy innovation episode. Our technology actually came second place across the entire country for sustainable innovations. Unfortunately, second place didn't get anything from Dragon's Den. So but we got a lot of publicity, and within a month, our company was like hurled into this media frenzy, and people were emailing us from all over the world. We had 6 weeks to put a business together and a website together and manage all of these inquiries, which was really cool. So that was the first venture. We took that pretty far. We have a patent for it. We received an offer to purchase the technology a few years ago from one of the largest OEMs in the market. So we didn't take the offer at the time. We didn't feel the offer reflected the value, but that was venture number one, and then we kind of morphed into venture number two, which was cleanair.ai. But really, to answer your question, why? It started off. It sounds kind of cliche to say, but it started off almost like altruistic, like we wanted to help make the world a better place, right? With stopping these unnecessary drops and saving gasoline. When you look at it on a grand scale, it was 300 million liters of fuel every year around the world that was being wasted. But really, at the crux of it, I feel like entrepreneurship is just it's internal, and it's a drive to do something bigger and kind of leave a legacy, right? Something that'll last, beyond you as a person, right? Like when I'm gone from this planet, what's remaining. And I think for me, that's really what it is. It's just leaving something behind. So yeah, I don't know. It's that's what it's morphed. I don't think it's altruistic anymore by any means, but that's
Mhm.
kind of how it started, being fresh out of school and out of university.
So, thanks, Devin. Jennifer, what was your catalyst?
Um, I think my catalyst, like Devin said, there is an altruistic element to it. When I look at both Hyperwallet and Inverse, I know that I have an underlying passion and belief in prosperity. With Hyperwallet, making the ability for people to transact easier was a motivator, and to stimulate business growth was a motivator. And with Inverse, there's a desire to see sort of wealth unleashed. I mean, if people learn how to invest properly from an early age, that has tremendous consequences of how, like a generation of people who grow up being far richer than anyone ever else has been. So there is an altruistic element, absolutely, for sure. Um, and as far as a legacy, absolutely. I'm definitely motivated by um, successful outcomes and making value. But my true motivator, the thing that really gets me going, is I really like to be creative. I really like to see an idea come to fruition, and just as importantly, for people to enjoy it and like it. So sometimes I say I'm an artist. This is when I'm being a little bit silly, but sometimes I say I'm an artist and entrepreneurship is my canvas. But I know it's a little bit silly, but that is sort of how I feel.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, very
It's
passionate about creation.
you're the type of people that draw outside of the boxes, right? You like to think out of the box. You don't want to be constrained. Correct.
Jen
I
gave
would
me a
say
thought.
that's
Jen gave me a thought as well. I think that those are really really good words, Jen. For what that made me think about is one word, which is building. Right, like for me, it's what gets me excited is building something. Right, so in Brampton, we're building this Brampton Innovation District, and in the tech startup, you're building a cool technology and a new market need for it. So I think really, to add to what I said before, the crux of it for me is building something.
Okay. Devin, you started your company with your friends, and this was a commitment that you all decided this is what we're going to do. We're going to be here for a while. So now your friends become your business partners and your co-founders. What was that transition like for you?
It was a long transition. So we actually stayed in business for almost a decade. And give or take, so some people came and some people left, and then they came back. So, but for the more or less, it was about a decade of friendship and business together. The transition was it it was easy in the beginning, and it got harder as the business grew and got more serious. And especially when you bring in other stakeholders, investors, customers, it could be VCs, it could be family and friends or angels. It doesn't matter. But when you had others with expectations, and that's when I would say friction could build with your friends, right? So that's when things really started transition and started to change. Um, but in the beginning, when you're still developing your product, you don't have many customers yet, you don't have many investors, on your board of directors, it's just your group of friends and maybe some family members. It's I don't want to say it's a fun and games, but it's a lot smoother, right? But again, these external stakeholders, when they come in, things get a lot more serious, and that's when friction would start to build.
Okay. So we'll get into the external stakeholders in a future question. But Jen, I wanted to ask your experience. You raised money in two economically difficult time periods. So in the early 2000s with Hyperwallet, and now in 2023 where we were seeing high interest rates. What was similar and what was different between the two? And what happened in the early odds that help you navigate what's happening today?
Right. So I guess you could say that we had the misfortune of starting Hyperwallet just as the dot-com bust was starting. I remember a VC saying to us when we were out fundraising, he said, "There's a cold wind blowing up from San Francisco." And then, it really did hit. So, I mean, that was like 2 decades ago, but it was, so Devin, you probably don't have experience with it, but it was not good. And then when we started Inverse, we were just starting to do the fundraising, and then inflation hit and interest rates hit and the stock market was crashing. And if you're talking about like an investment research platform and the investing environment's not so good, people aren't as interested because they're losing money. So on the surface, two scenarios of bad timing. However, I don't hold to that notion of bad timing. It may look like bad timing on the surface, but time passes, and then that bad timing turns out to be good timing. So it's a bit of a wait and see. Um, I will say that I haven't gotten serious about fundraising for Inverse because of what's happened in the marketplace. Um, we went back to bootstrapping, and now I'm very, very focused on revenue, um, laying the ground for fundraising, but not being active at it at this stage. So I guess what's different is, back in the Hyperola days, like we just kind of kept, we knocked maybe for longer than we should have because it just was not the right time. And this time, at least I have the experience of going through a bad time to raise money, realizing that it can be negotiated, and just keeping my focus more on the business rather than at knocking on doors.
Okay. So let me ask, when you were raising with Hyperwallet, talk to me about the dynamics between you and the co-founders in your company. What was that like? Like, were you considered best friends, I guess, because you started the company together, you had worked in previous companies together. What was your relationship like with your co-founders?
Um, well, I very much admired my co-founder. I thought that she was brilliant, and I still do. I still admire her. I still think she's brilliant. Um, I think we went through a big honeymoon phase at the beginning. There was so much enthusiasm about what we were doing, and we did raise some early financing, roughly about $500,000 before things got too bad. So there's all this energy that we're pouring into it, and and then sort of, reality started to hit as money started to dwindle out of the bank account, and, you know, fundraising was becoming increasingly difficult, and we didn't have proper business model at the time, like a way to make money.
Okay. So, let me turn to Devin, because as you grow your company and you realize that, okay, these are my business partners and my friends, but at the same time, now that we're grown up, we have to actually start thinking about how we protect the business and how do we protect our individual interests in the company. What does that look like when you get to that stage?
Yeah, it takes a lot of foresight, right? And I guess being so fresh, like we're first time entrepreneurs, we didn't really have companies before. Some of us had some professional experience in industry, but the startup game, as you know, is a totally different game. Going through it a second time, I would do things very, very differently. And I think Jen had a really good point where times change, right? And as an entrepreneur, and when you're working, with your co-founders and you're raising this money, it's important to recognize the time frame that you're in and think about how that time frame could change in the future. For example, we raised money with a venture capital firm in 2021, right? And at the time, funding was fairly hot, interest rates were low, it was relatively easy to raise funds. Just 12 months later, the tides start to change, right? Like as Jen said, like a cold wind was blowing from California, so um, the reins of the VCs started to tighten up and we started to get squeezed a bit. And whereas in a regular time frame, a VC would have said, "Yeah, we'll extend your convertible note by X amount of months." That didn't necessarily happen with us. It was really like, "Hey, you gotta step it up." And by the way, we're gonna do X and Y to your company and add these other conditions into your note. So there's I think having the foresight of knowing what time frame you're in and how things could get worse or how things could get better is really important for an entrepreneur to know. And so much of the time as entrepreneurs, we're just happy to raise money. Someone's going to write us a check. Oh my God, like, yeah, I'll take that. But you don't, if you have a good product and a good business, someone will come and give you money. You don't have to take this check today, right? And I think that part is really important. For us, with my co-founders and I, we got super excited with the first check, and then we were even more excited with the second check, right? And ultimately, founders could end up digging themselves a hole for their startup company, right? If you get too excited and carried away with being in that moment with that that funding. Does that answer the question, Betsy?
It does. It does. So I wanna actually talk about the relationship with your investors, because you had made a point of saying that people go where the money is, but that shouldn't always be the case, because when companies go into relationships with investors, like, sorry, a financial relationship with investors, it's really a marriage that's going to last the length of the time that the where the money keeps flowing. So for you, maybe I'll start with Jennifer. What was it like when you were uh, raising money? What kind of investors did you go after in the beginning?
So, I guess you're talking about Hyperwallet days when we were
Yeah,
raising
yeah,
them, because
and
we have.
yeah, and how did that change your criteria in for inverse too?
I think the environment was different than it is now. So I don't know if what I have to share is going to be entirely relevant um, for new investors, for new founders. It was a lot less structured than it is now. There weren't accelerators and incubators and all of that sort of thing. Um, and all of the sort of wisdom, best practices, maybe it's the better word, that have grown up around theories around testing and failing fast and all these sorts of things, that just wasn't there. Um, so yeah, so I guess I just wanna be clear about that. Um, I still I guess my strategy at this stage going forward is to, um, I want to, when I start speaking with investors, I want to have as much power as I can, and I believe that will come from having a strong company, and strength comes from having product market fit, which is just a 50-cent way of saying there are people willing to pay for what you have. So that's I'm just more focused on business rather than fundraising at this stage for now, for the moment.
But you also talked about coming from a position of strength. So I'm going to ask Devin this: is that so when you look for investors, what would you look for differently than you did in the beginning? Like what are the things that resonated with you?
Yeah. For the company that we were building, so we were in the CleanAir.ai was in the HVAC air filtration space. We had an HVAC filter that produced HEPA class air quality, but also reduced the energy consumption in the building. And we had sensors built into it, so you can know exactly when to change your filter, and we can gather intelligence on the air quality in the building. So looking for an investor, what was important for us was someone that was connected in that space. We weren't just looking for just for money. We were looking for someone that could make those strategic connections with customers. So the industry was property technology, or prop tech for short. We were looking for prop tech specific VCs, and we found some. Right, we found some. We started off the journey by joining a prop tech accelerator, and this accelerator actually put some funds into the company, so that was really helpful. And through that prop tech accelerator, and that was like our first round, and then through this prop tech accelerator, we actually met a larger prop tech VC who ended up putting some funds in the round. So when we were identifying potential funders, I think we did a fairly good job. Like we were very intentional. We did have some funding that was offered to us from angels, but we again wanted to be very careful of like our cap table. We're trying to keep it as clean as possible. So we didn't end up going with the funding from the angels. We stuck with the VCs. But you also need, the other part of this is you need to be careful the strings that come with the funding. Right, we were offered funding from a few other sources, and some of those other sources we didn't want to go and attach ourselves to those strings, right? One of them would have made us relocate our company entirely, which wasn't really plausible for us. And that's just an example of some of the strings that can come with the money.
Is there like from both your perspectives, knowing what you've lived through, especially with investor relationships, from your perspective, is there an inordinate amount of power imbalance when it comes to this? Like Jen, did you experience a power imbalance when you eventually got funding from the investor side, and like how much the kind of pressure that they would put on you as a company and a founder?
Well, I mean, as it turns out, that first money that we raised with Hyperwallet, no, it wasn't too onerous or anything like that. It was just the person who happened to invest. He was um, just, I guess, bit of a different sort of guy. And no, it wasn't like your typical VC. I mean, he was a professional investor, but it was just different. It was just a different time, right, than it is now.
Why is that? What, like maybe Devin, you can answer that. Like it just seems to be maybe the early 2000s were a different time when technology was starting to peak, and then everything was like, oh my God, I got to get into all this new stuff. And now, like there is, I think, because there's a reticence in what's happening in the market, that investors too have put more pressure on founders to meet specific milestones, and to the point that they're hovering, right? I mean, Devin, what do you think?
Yeah. I think For me, it really depends on the type of the investor and the type of the VC, right? So I've seen the smaller the investor, I found that you have more and more pressure, right? If you have a much bigger institutional investor, you have a little bit more flexibility, and the founders have typically like a little bit more say in the company, right? The smaller VCs, maybe they're not as well known. They tend to exercise their strength and the power over the founders and try to. A lot of them, it's kind of weird because some of them get the inclination that they can run the company better than the founders, but we're seeing in the market that that's not actually the case. So like a lot of these VCs that take over a tech company and try to run it, they end up running it downwards instead of upwards, right? So I'm seeing that's more common with the smaller, lesser known VCs rather than the bigger VCs. If I could give advice to a startup, I would say try to go to a bigger, more well known VC and raise funds there. I think that would be a better experience than a smaller VC, and that's just my personal opinion.
Okay. So let me pivot a little bit and talk about a different type of relationship. So these are partners and suppliers. And so a lot of startups, they begin by trying to do everything themselves, right? So they may not necessarily seek out potential partners or vendors at the early stages, where they could actually get some competitive advantage. So I'll ask Jennifer this because, first of all, in either through Hyperwallet or through Inverse, do you rely on certain partnerships or suppliers? And if if based on those two experiences, what are the things that you look for in defining a good partner or vendor relationship?
It's definitely more relevant to talk about suppliers with respect to Inverse. Um, so when we were creating Inverse, or sorry, it's still active creation, but when we were first, the idea was first there, we needed data suppliers, but we weren't sure what our business model was going to be. And there was a bit of disconnect between how the supplier would price out their data versus how we were going to be consuming it and then, you know, earning money from it down the road. So, but we needed that data in order to start building. And there are other tools and that sort of thing. So that was tricky. That was a tricky negotiation to try and create a contract that was flexible enough to support, where we thought we were going to go. But like I said, it was just where we think we're going to go. Um, so contract's okay. It's tolerable. Um, Knowing what I know now, I would probably want to tweak it. Fortunately, they are receptive and good partners, and we have been able to make some changes to, like we reinterpreted what a customer was, which was, very good in my favor. It helped us having to start paying additional money. So that was great. Um, I guess what I would say, the piece of advice I would give to nascent entrepreneurs is to really read those contracts carefully. It's so difficult because they can be so dry and they just, but if you can try and put yourself into different frames of mind, under different scenarios, it may help to enlighten what you're signing on to. Um,
Okay.
and then give you some latitude to negotiate um, things that would be more in your favor. But
So yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I think working with contracts and that sort of thing, I definitely think it's something you get better at. You need to have experience doing it,
Mhm.
um, and practice doing it.
I think
So
so. The other thing about contracts is that I guess when like very, very early on, people don't put as much importance in contracts because they think that, hey, my friend's doing something over here, let's collaborate, and then they fail to even put a good contract together to make each other accountable for the things that they've said that they would do, right? So I'm going to turn to Devin because, like, choosing the right partner is going to be important, especially in the beginning when, let's say, you need to establish a certain level of trust, especially when you're bootstrapping and you can't necessarily afford to pay the supplier for the things that they are providing you. So tell me what these negotiations or agreements look like to make sure that there's some mutually beneficial thing that happens between the both of you without one actually having a, a, a stronger upper hand than the other.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a good question. I would almost come back a little bit to what Jen was saying earlier and kind of watching how the winds are blowing, right? And a lot of the time, when a startup signs a contract with someone, they're very excited about it, right? And it's in a happy time, and hey, we have a new partner on board. Oh, we got our first supplier locked in. There's a lot of excitement, and startups can get caught in that, right? And not realizing that there's going to be dozens of contracts down the road and more suppliers, right? That you can secure. But I think it's important to say, like from like different viewpoints, like what Jen said, how can this go south? How can this relationship go south? How can this partnership go south? How can this supplier go south? Right. And one of the key things that we learned is, especially specifically to suppliers, multiple sources of supply always, right? Never rely on a single source of supply. So we were a hardware company, and we had to buy these physical filters that we were selling to customers, and it would have de-risked our company greatly had we had a second source of supply, right? But so exclusivity is one thing to look for in these contracts. Payment terms, right? Net 30, net 60, net 90. Ideally, from a startup perspective, you want to push out your payment term as long as you can. The supplier would want to squeeze it down as much as you can, right? So working with that supplier to find that balance. Keep an eye out for how the contract could be changed, right? You don't want someone to make a unilateral change. These change, like if there's a suggested change to the contract, you'd want it to be a mutual change. So those are a few of the things I've seen with supplier relationships, but coming back to partnerships in general, I guess, can you repeat that part of the question, Hesse, the partnership part?
Yeah. Okay. So what did I say here? Um, so what would the negotiation or agreement look like so that there is equal benefit to both of you without one having the upper hand?
Yeah, I would, I think there's creative ways to do this with partnerships, right? One thing I would advise against is rushing into like any sort of joint venture or a 50-50 partnership. 50-50 partnerships, there's a lot of challenges with them. A lot of the time they don't work out as well. Um, and essentially what happens with these 50-50 partnerships is you can end up in a deadlock, right? Between shareholders, your board of directors, all of that. So, avoid 50-50s and try to find other ways that you can make that partnership equal. Like even you don't necessarily have to give equity for a partnership, but if you're in that situation where you found a strategic partner that's willing to put some money in, and or give you X for a certain piece of equity, don't give a ton of your company away. Try to hold as much as you can, and try to find another way. Think from your partner, this potential partner's shoes. What do they want, right? What's in it for me with them, right? And try to see if you can give them something else, other than equity or control in your company. Keep your company, the operations, the board, as much internally as you can, and try not to give too much of that out.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So let's go to the last topic where we're going to talk about you as the CEOs and what makes you tick. So Jennifer, as a two-time founder, what do you think has kept you going despite the hurdles that you've experienced? And what do you see in yourself that may not have been evident at the time of, let's say, your first company?
So what keeps me going? Guess a desire to see my vision manifest, to put it simply. And what do I see in myself that I maybe didn't have before? Um, Well, I was pretty wet around the ears when I co-founded Hyperwallet. So, I've added a lot of experience to that. One of the things that I heard back in the day was no credibility. So I did a lot of work to close that credibility gap again. Like, nobody's going to say that to me again. And then there's a lot of soft skills. I mean, business is about people. Um, you know, improving your skills around empathetic listening, um, trying to find win-win scenarios. I mean, there's a lot, I would say,
I want to
that I've
actually bring
added
up.
since for over the 20 years.
So this is something that you said. You said being a leader is tough. You have to give courage when you feel none. I don't find any of that easy. You have to be curious and you have to have faith in yourself. But I do know I'm improving as a leader. I know I'm better than I was when I started Hyperwallet. I can evaluate my decisions objectively. So, what do you think? How you changed as a leader over time?
Um, so that quote, that's still true from where I sit right now. It is tough to be a leader. You do have to show, you do have to encourage other people. Um, you have to be curious, asking those questions. Um, it's really a skill and art, um, rather than just, maybe jumping to a conclusion. Um,
Is it a
and you have to have faith.
now, would you say that you did anything differently? And back then, I don't even know if there was a thing called mental health back in the aughts, but now it seems to be a way for a lot of founders to actually find strength if they have the time to meditate, if they have time to take care of themselves, like their mental health or their physical health. Is that something that has changed with you as well?
In a way, I think life has even gotten more difficult than it was. I mean, now I have a family. I have a parent who's dying. Um, it's really gotten more difficult, and the demands on my mental health have grown exponentially. Um, so yeah, I meditate. I do a lot of internal work. I really try to keep I find if I focus on what I don't want, it's not helpful at all. I have to keep, quote unquote, eyes on the prize, the vision of where I want it to get to and how that's going to feel. Um, so you have to be intentional about um, your emotional state. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So, Devin, let's turn to you about the topic of asking for help because you are all for it. I know you have relied on mentors to help you while you were dealing with some issues with your company. Tell me about the importance of mentorship and seeking advice and how what that has meant to you during that time.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, as the co-founder CEO of a company, especially in the CEO role, like it's very lonely at the top. Right? There's not a lot of people that you can turn to, especially around you, like in your executive circle, in your co-founding circle, in your director circle. You can't necessarily turn and speak to these people openly about some of the issues that the company's having or even you're having personally. So very lonely at the top as the CEO. But having external advisors was one of the most powerful things for us at Clean Air and all through my entrepreneurial journey. I had an EIR, multiple EIRs, like one at Altitude Accelerator. I had one all the way in Guelph. I had another one that was a professor at Rotman, where I did my MBA, and I would routinely, especially as we're going through the acquisition phases, as we're raising funds, as we're negotiating with the suppliers and building this partner relationship. I would be on the phone with these advisors and really just using these advisors as sounding boards, right? That's all it really is. It's you're asking some questions and you're getting some feedback. And as the CEO, it's your job to take that feedback and just you make the decision on it, whether you want to take it or not take it or take action on it or do the total opposite. It's entirely up to you. But as long as you're gathering as many of these qualified opinions as you can, and then I find that you're essentially collecting this data, and that allows you to navigate a little bit better as the CEO. So advisors, very critical, multiple advisors, very critical, because there's times when my advisors were saying the total opposite, right? And that would help me calibrate in terms of the next steps. So yeah, I would highly recommend having multiple diverse advisors for anybody growing a company.
Okay. So I have one more question to ask both of you. As you look back and you, let's say, reconcile your vision of entrepreneurship based on what's real and based on what you envision, what was the most telling lesson for you, Jennifer? Like regrets, anything that you would do differently? What do you think?
I think having faith is really important. Because when it's dark and bleak, which it certainly will be from time to time, you have to have faith. And I think that circles back to what you started this podcast with, resilience and how much you're going to hang on to make your vision a reality. Because it's not about the honeymoon stage. It's not about, when things are great. When the rubber hits the road is when things are really dark. And that's what you have to get through.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's powerful. Devin, what do you think?
Yeah, regrets. I don't have any regrets. I would do it all over again if I could. The amount of learning that came out of it was unbelievable, right? It was just like the things that we were put through as a company, the challenges we faced. I can't put a value on that education that it taught me. Would I do things differently? 100%. But that doesn't mean I regret it, right? Looking back, there's a million mistakes that we made, but that's again how we learn, right? That's how we grow. So I wouldn't go back and change anything. It is what it is. But for the next time, I know way better. I won't make the same mistakes twice, right? So definitely happy with the experience of going through it, and no regrets.
Thank you. So I think that's going to be our last word, and that's all we have time for today. And I thank both Jennifer and Devin for lending their wisdom to this important topic and sharing your journeys about a topic that not many people talk about. So thank you again for coming. If you in our audience have any topics that you do want us to cover, please drop us a line at communications@altitudeaccelerator.ca. In the meantime, have fun and stay safe.
Thanks, Hesse.